So, Eamon, day 4 of the Richard Satchwell murder trial. And you heard today, I'm going to ask you what is a special enhanced cognitive interview, because the jury heard that the gardaí asked Richard Satchwell to participate in one of these 4 years into the search for his missing wife, Tina.
Yeah, it's the first I've heard of this as well, an ECI, Enhanced Cognitive Interview. So he was invited to this in the 20th of June, 2021 by appointment. It was away from a Garda station in a kind of an interview suite. So the whole idea, the detective Sergeant David Noonan, who was giving evidence, was explaining that, you know, it's a different style of interview, and it's considered the gold standard in interviewing. And it's a way of making sure that they get all the details from people, that people kind of try and put themselves back to the point in time where they really need to find out what happened about something. And he gives an example to Richard Satchwell, like in his evidence. He talks about that when you see this red water bottle he has, you know, what's in it, and when the interview starts, you know, Richard Satchwell, this has been explained to Richard Satchwell, and he's saying it's a red water bottle with water in it. And he goes, well, you know, he said, there's also writing on it, and there's a grey cap and a little hook on the lid. And I don't know what that does. And you don't really know, is it water or could it be another liquid, or it's a liquid in the bottle? So he's trying to give an example. Now, it's even more than that, he said. So he was trying to give an example of the kind of granular detail he wants to hear.
Okay. And is it usually used then on people who are witnesses? And he obviously wasn't under arrest for this. He was invited along.
No, he wasn't. He was being brought in not as a suspect, and I think that's the way they're often used. It's, you know, he said, like, you know, it's the room is shown to them. They're explained. There's cameras here. It's recorded on DVD. He said there's an attempt to try and create a relaxing environment, and that while the officer who's leading the interview, you know, speaks a lot at the start, this is explained to them, that then they sit back and they just kind of let someone talk, and they might every so often interrupt to say, look, can you just bring us back to when you said you left that morning, to go a little bit more detail about, you know, what happened between the moment you got out of bed to when you made the cup of tea, to when you got into the car, what direction you took. So, like, we're going to hear this in this kind of the transcript of this interview. There was a lot of fine detail about, you know, you went past the church, or where was the car parked. And this is, say, covering just, you know, literally the day before she went missing. Tina Satchwell went missing in March 2017 on the 20th. So they kind of go through the day before, and it brings it up to, you know, more or less, you get as far as to the Tuesday week, and there's a lot of this fine detail,
so
and a lot of it
is cover then that time when she goes missing, or does it cover their earlier relationship and bits around that? Well,
no, he does. He asks her to, you know, explain a bit about, you know, the relationship, and, you know, Richard gets into how, you know, how they met. That, you know, one time he was 2 stone heavier than he is now. And you know, it wasn't necessarily love at first sight from her point of view, although it was for him. And again, we've heard some of this in previous statements he's given that have already been given in evidence. So he goes a little bit, you know, in the early days of the relationship, and he mentions how he broke the law, trying to buy stuff for her that he couldn't afford himself. And this is, again, some of this has been alluded to in other statements that we've already heard. He got in trouble for check fraud, but, you know, she forgave him for that. And he goes on about how they used to they often talk all night. He said, you know, there was when they got Heidi, the rescue dog, and then they got the Chihuahua Ruby at a car boot sale, and then later they got Pearl the parrot, and that there was a period of real happiness. And they moved to Youghal. She'd always wanted to live there, and you know, it was a time of happiness for him. But when the parrot died, he said it was like losing a child. It was something that was you know, very upsetting. He also spoke as well about, you know, how Tina could be quite nasty, and there was at one point, he gives a date at one point around 1996 that he took a box of tablets because he found he couldn't take it anymore. Now, there's a lot of back and forth in this interview where they kind of cut back because the officer interviewing him brings him back again and asks me, tell me more about this, or tell me more about that, or can you just for now concentrate on the date? So there's a little bit of, it's not a linear kind of conversation where he's going through everything. So, you know, I mean, he's getting through that, like the different, you know, her lifestyle about how she used to go swimming every day. And that, when she was living in Fermoy, she went swimming all the time there, and he worked on I think a local rugby pitch or something. He was at some kind of job there, and they kind of have a pretty standard routine. And he'd go down and collect the dog off her when she was meeting her friend. He mentioned then, he kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent, that he was still paying the direct debit for her membership in Youghal. And he said he still would be, this is in June 2021, that he still would be, only the swimming pool had cancelled the direct debit because he didn't want to do it. He wanted to keep everything as normal, for when she came back. And that's the way he was putting it. He was talking then as well about the kind of contact with her family and allegations by a female relative of hers that she had been molested when she was age 10. Now, these weren't allegations by Tina herself. These are like a third party making them. And that she came back from a visit in relation to this. She was physically shaken. And he said she could lose her temper easily depending on what kind of mood she was in. And she could be very angry. Other times she'd just go to bed. She'd have a cup of tea and go to bed. He said on one occasion his face was badly scratched, and he thinks, the doctor, he went to the doctor who Tina had called when he had taken his overdose or attempted overdose. And he says over the years, like, he had other things like he'd suffered black eyes, scratches to his back and to his belly, that he had bite marks and cuts to the head. But he said, he hid those injuries from relatives and others wouldn't be visible. And he says, but it sounds like a lot, but spread over 28 years, it wasn't really that frequent, was the way he put it in this interview. He mentioned when he was talking about Tina's best friend Angela, she used to meet. He mentioned that he got a bit of stick because he didn't know her surname, and he said as far as he knew that they didn't have each other's phone numbers. They just knew where to meet. And he mentions, I was actually introduced to her when Crime Call were filming in Fermoy in 2018, and he met her then. And he mentioned, he said something like, I think she has a scientist, or her husband is a scientist of some kind, and a son who's abroad, but he doesn't know the names or anything about them, wasn't really sure where she lived or anything like this. And he was talking about, he never kept tabs on Tina, or, he didn't watch what she was doing. He wasn't kind of, he was, I think at one point in a separate part of the interview, he mentions when they're at a car boot sale. I says, I don't keep a dog lead on her. He was explaining that she, as far as he was concerned, he let her do whatever she wanted to do. And he also made kind of he was making the point that the grandmother who raised her died in 1997 on the 20th of March, and she disappeared on the 20th of March. Now, he wasn't necessarily making any kind of leap or any conclusion about that. This is something he just said in this interview. And then asked to describe the actual day she went missing, he was saying the whole day was the same as all the others. And then he was asked, look, just talk about this particular Sunday. And he talked about how he got up at 5:30, which is his normal time, 5:30, 5:45.
On a Sunday? On
a Sunday, because he always gets up at that time. He'd make coffee and sandwiches to take to the car boot sale. At around, this is the day before she went missing, okay, when they went to a car boot sale at Carrantoul.
Because he does paint this picture in that interview and previously in the evidence the jury has heard of this simple life nearly that they lead. They are a couple who've met in England. They come over and back, I think, between Ireland and England for some time, live initially in Fermoy, where she has family, and then move together to Youghal, to this house, which they plan to do up, he says. He talks about going to work and she's sort of at home and looking after these animals, and they have a very simple life. They don't seem to do anything outside the ordinary. At least that's what he's been describing all the way along to the police.
Yeah, and again, he was talking about when they went to this particular car boot sale, they were asked, he was asked what did she buy, and he mentions she bought a dress and a makeup set and a really small travel hair dryer that was the size of your fist once it was folded up. He said, I'd probably get in trouble for mentioning this. He says, but the least they ever made at a car boot sale was €250. And they left that day about 2 o'clock, 2:30. He was asked, they were going back and forth then. He'd get to 2:30 or leaving it, and they'd be asked again, well, how was she on the day? And he was just talking about how she went to look for things to buy, that she'd asked for any notes he had on her. He had €20 in change, so he kept the change and she went off with the fivers or tenors or whatever it was. And And then on the way home, when they did get back into the car on the way home, they talked about what they were going to have for dinner that night. That he parked. He was asked exactly where he parked his car, and he managed to get a spot right opposite the house. And that she took out. He's going through all this, and
what did they have for dinner?
And well, again, this was previously mentioned, but they got the Apache takeaway special, and they had a Cajun chicken pizza and chips, and I think a chicken and mushrooms pizza as well with chips, and they kept one for I think the following day. But that was the fact that one was kept for the following day was mentioned in a previous statement and not in this one. Okay. So just to keep them all straight, So he was asked at this time if he thought Tina was still out there, and he kind of said, yes, that he hopes something spontaneous will happen, that she will turn up. He said that she'll either turn up at one of their relatives' houses, or he'll get a registered letter telling him to sell the house.
But this, of course, is 4 years in, and we've heard previously that the cops started to become a bit concerned kind of months after she disappeared, when they carried out their initial search, which they describe as non-invasive, but they did search the property. Did they take the laptops or some?
It was laptops and some documents were taken,
on
that search. This would have been, nearly it'd be 4 years, more than 4 years. From this point of view, where he's now being interviewed.
Nowhere as such with anything. Would they have kept in touch? He's seen as a person of interest, really, isn't he?
He's obviously the last person. They think he's the last person they can find who has seen her. So he's invited back in for this interview. So again, they're going about, like, we're still on the Sunday night, and they're asking him in fine detail. So they're asking me again, just to go back a bit, what did you talk about while you were eating? And apparently, according to him, Tina said it was a mortal sin to talk while you're eating, and that if there was food in front of you, your mouth's are for talking. Was the way he put it in this interview. And then afterwards, then he ran a bath for her, which he said was a 7-day-a-week job for him. And after the bath, then he'd sit on the edge of the bath and talk, and that brought them up to 9, 9:30. And he put 2 towels on the bed, and she'd go lie in the bed, and then he'd rub baby oil on her. He'd give her feet a rub, and he did the same thing every night. He would spend 30 minutes massaging each foot every night after her bath, and then she'd roll over and go to sleep. So Sergeant Noonan then, he asked what the conversation was about the night before her disappearance, when he was oiling her. And he said they spoke about what she didn't actually buy at the car boot sale. She was kind of, there was a pair of jeans that she was looking at, and she felt she should have gone back and offered €15, but the lady who was selling it wanted 80. So he said he says that night anyway, he says there was no tears that night. Sometimes she'd spent a lot of time crying before she went to sleep, which he had put down to this depression. He says that night, if anything was said, he said he doesn't remember if anything particular. Is like probably "I love you" or "I hate you" or something like that. She might have said, and she put her head on her shoulder, and they went to sleep. And then the Monday morning, he was up early again, 5:30, 5:45 a.m. and started, as he put it, busying himself. He emptied the bird cage, took the paper out of the bottom of the cage. He's going through all this stuff, and the parrot only eats fruit, doesn't drink water, so I was giving him some fruit. So he went out to the shed and he did some plumbing there. And between 8:30 and 9 that morning, then he made tea and toast for Tina. She had already come downstairs, was in the sitting room, so he brought it into her there. And then that's when she asked him to go to Dungarvan to get bird food in Aldi. And he never said no to her. And so he kind of immediately went, got a quick wash, put on a fresh T-shirt. And he said he left about 10 a.m. He collected the dole money, his and her dole money in the post office in Youghal, and then he drove to Dungarvan. And he said the strange thing was that Tina had asked him to stop at this church in Grange, which is en route to Dungarvan, to light a candle for Pearl the parrot. And so he did that. He said he wasn't a particularly religious man, so he was only...
Pearl the parrot has died at this point.
Pearl the parrot is dead. So he didn't linger in the church. He more or less did what he was told, and he left. And then Sergeant just kind of recapped. This happens a couple of times in this interview where the Sergeant kind of runs over everything again and asks him, so you did this, you did that. And he goes through and he asks a couple of questions. And he mentions that, before he gave Tina a peck on the lips and said goodbye before he left. And then, so this is all being read out in court to the jury by Geraldine Small. And it's there was, just before, when proceedings started earlier in the day, 2 guards came in with all these big ring binders, and I think there was other interviews in that from the other interviews that they've already seen and heard. Mm-hmm. So they were all brought in, and that's they were all brought into the jury. So they have the luxury, I suppose, of the transcript in front of them. They're not necessarily, they're able to double check things, or if you hear a name or whatever, you can go back and see it carefully. So he said it was about 7:15, midday when he returned home, or midday about that time. And he said, and again, her mobile phone was there, and she seldom, she and her dogs were there as well. And he said, although she didn't always take Ruby out with her at this stage, since a certain time before that, he said it was unusual, and he checked upstairs and couldn't find her. And this included the sunbed, which is in one of the attic rooms. And he said he still started to get a jumpiness in his stomach. And now again, we're jumping back and forth because he's being the person, he's just allowed to talk, and he was saying that his family wouldn't really bother with her, and he said Tina would sometimes get a bit of this, like, who do you think you are? Because as he said, like, he thought there was an element of jealousy because Tina, not only had she the figure, she also had the fashion sense and the looks, and she felt some people kind of were, I suppose, jealous of her in this. He was asked about the money
Who was jealous of her? His family?
Well, it again, like, it starts off with her family, but then I think there was also other people that, should sometimes get remarks as well. You didn't specify which family members or anything like that. He was asked about the money that was missing, and again, like, he talked about it. It was normally kept in the attic room behind a collection of shoe boxes that were there.
This money we heard in the early days.
Yeah, the 26,000.
26,000. They'd got it from the sale of the house in Fermoy. They bought the house in Youghal, had this left over, kept it in cash in a suitcase, and it was missing when he really went looking for her. Realised her phone was there, the dogs were there. He went upstairs, the suitcase was missing along with the cash. Yeah,
and again, it veers off then, mentions, he's talking then about how Tina had threatened to get her own back on him for going to England in 2002. This is when he spent a year over there working. He was sending money back. And he said she made that threat that she was going to leave him maybe 200 or 300 times over the course of 15 years. So he started to think maybe this is what happened. Now, he said that this money, again, he was asked to go back to the money, how they came to this. And he said, look, the extra money came from, the car boot sales, but that he says any extra money that would come in, they would chuck it upstairs. And this, he said, they had a couple of small lotto wins. Like, I think the largest was €180 or something like that. The others are double, 40, 50 or 60 euro, something like that. It was low level stuff. And he said that he also did, various kind of DIY jobs, and he did bits and pieces for other people. So if he was paid in cash for that, again, the money would go up into this box. He said, and basically, like, she controlled the money because she didn't trust him not to spend it. And he mentions in another part of the interview where, like, he would spend it, but he'd spend it on buying nice clothes for hers, and he never had any fears or worries about going in and buying women's clothes or buying underwear even for her. So he felt that he kind of understood why she took the money. And this was in his head at the time. This is how he saw it as happening. He said that Tina would have known that he had this appointment with his doctors in Fermoy. And he thought that he was going to walk up and go into the relative's house in Fermoy, and he'd find her there. And again, he said,
how long after that she goes missing is this? The week?
No, this is Friday. So this is Friday the 24th, and
days after.
So he's saying that she was last seen on the 20th.
So he goes up to Fermoy. He has a doctor's appointment, and he's going to drop into her relatives and hope to see her there.
Yeah. And so, but he's asked them to go back again to explain, well, what did you do on the Tuesday and the Wednesday? And he was saying, look, he didn't go out. He didn't bring the dogs out for a walk. He says he just let them out into the back garden. Normally, he'd said earlier, they'd bring the dogs out every night together. I think on the Sunday night they were tired, or she was tired, and they hadn't gone that particular night. And he said he sat there. He sat there crying. He said, Heidi in the chair beside him, and Ruby the Chihuahua was licking the tears. He said every day was like Groundhog Day. Those 3 days were a complete blur to him. So when he went then, it wasn't his usual GP. Again, this is actually, I'm sorry, I'm jumping forward ahead. So initially he says he went to the GP, and the GP had said to him, it sounded like Tina's disappearance was planned. After the doctor's visit, he went back again to family members, and no one had seen Tina. He said he doesn't go to car boot sales anymore since he left, that there's no joy in them. He was also asked then about rumours that she might have gone off with a Polish man, and that he had heard these rumours. And he said, look, she might have had some Polish acquaintances. There was one Polish man who worked in a secondhand shop, but he didn't know his name, and he was since gone. And there was another couple that he spoke to as well, and he knew other Polish people from his driving job, but he said, they were just acquaintances, and she wouldn't, they'd have spoken to him very briefly over the years, and he didn't believe. I don't think he believed this was true. And then there was also, he mentioned every so often, he'd mentioned in this interview talking about paedophilia, and he was asked to explain, what are you referring to here? And again, he said that Tina had told him that she believed she'd been touched inappropriately when she was a child. At one point, she was in a field and she woke up and she was taken to a doctor's and she was bleeding down there. He also then, he was talking about how he thinks that Tina was planning to leave him, that she'd changed his name on a bill at that date, or she had written to them and without him realising it, and thought that, that the death of Pearl the parrot had kind of, after a period of happiness, it really hit her hard, and things weren't going as well with Valentine, the parrot. Mm. And there was, again, it was the back and forth, and
he's putting some strands together there. He's describing her as being sort of down and out. She's had a bad enough day at the car boot sale because she hasn't got the jeans. She should have gone back for the €15. The parrot. One parrot is dead, but sorry, they have another parrot, yeah?
Yeah, so Valentine's was the parrot they bought on Valentine's Day in 2017 to replace Pearl. And again, he mentioned in this, he said, you probably shouldn't have got the same type of parrot because it's not going to be the same, and it's going to remind you of the other parrot and keep you unhappy.
Who he said was like a child to them. So he's describing that she's the grief then that her grandmother, who she was close to, her anniversary is on the 20th of March. And he's also making references to these allegations that he's making, that she was, had sort of issues with child sex abuse, which are unsubstantiated completely in the courtroom for the moment. This is just all coming from him. We do know, of course, that at this point in time, and he's giving this very detailed statement, referred to as a special enhanced cognitive interview, that the state believe that Tina Satchwell is actually under the stairs in the home in Youghal, and that he has killed her on, way back in 4 years previous, that he has hid her body in a chest freezer in the garden before sort of burying it in this sort of shallow grave underneath the staircase and topped with concrete. So while this statement has been read out in full, the jury have been told that, obviously, essentially, he's describing that she's alive, isn't he?
And after the interview in June, the following January, so this is now January 2022, the transcript of this interview that he has done has been printed out and is read back to him, and there's a couple of changes that he makes. And at the end of it, then he also volunteers. I personally think she is still out there, and that's how that finishes. So
okay,
we're back in court again tomorrow.
So tomorrow's day 5.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's always difficult to know where you're at until it gets going. But you have moved up to
January 2022 now.
You're 4 years after she goes missing in 2017. We obviously know that one of the key moments in the trial will be the description of that Garda search at that family home in October of 2023, when they describe an invasive Garda search where the remains of Tina Satchwell is found. There's presumably going to be an awful lot of evidence around, crime scene, searching, forensics.
There will, of course, because we even heard kind of minute detail about the non-invasive search in which the 2 laptops and the documents were taken. Mm-hmm. And it started off with the photographer who went in, who photographed every room and is brought through the entire, layout of the house. And then the Garda mapper who made the map at the time is also goes through the entire layout of the house. And some of the search officers were brought in, the exhibits officers.
You've heard the evidence around those 2 searches. The first being the non-invasive, the second being the one with the luminol.
No, they were both the same day. So the luminol was at the end. I suppose it was slightly separate in that it finished at the end, but it was all the same. It's the same 12-hour search was covered, and the luminol, or Blue Star is the chemical. I think it's a generation on from luminol, and the
You're
forensic scientist.
Come back to that evidence, though.
Say again?
You're unlikely to come back to that evidence in the trial, you imagine, any evidence around that earlier search. You have clearly moved timeline-wise up to 2020 now.
Yeah, up to
Which is a
2022.
big jump in a few days, really, isn't it?
Well, it's moving on, yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Up to 22.
yeah, we're up to January 22, January 23rd, 2022, and it's read back to him,
Okay.
and he signs off on it. And this is the 124-page transcript that was read out in court today.
And it was initially said that this trial is going to take 6 weeks.
Well, the judge then, when he was talking to the jury, in reply to a note from them, told them, look, the estimate was 5 weeks. So we're into week 2 at this stage.
Yeah, indeed. And what about his legal team, headed by Brendan Graham, is it, senior counsel? Are they cross-examining any of the witnesses so far?
They have. They've examined, I mean, they asked questions of certainly all the people, the officer who took the initial call in Fermoy Barracks, well, when Satchwell called into him, and then what he did, and then the follow-up, the guard who made the check on him a few days later, and then the station sergeant who said, look, maybe we need to get a missing person statements from him, and then the guard who took the initial missing persons report, the guard then who took a following statement. So there has been cross-examination of exactly when what happened, and certain things were clarified. Like in terms of I think the media interviews that we heard, the 14 of them that were played last week. I mean, there was a guard called in evidence to say, here are the media interviews, and that was more or less it. So there was no real cross-examination on offer. And again, today, like a lot of this being read out was actually already agreed between defence and the prosecution.
So it's factual evidence that's been put before the court, essentially, and it's been read in, so it's there. What about him? How is he?
He's not reacting. He's there with his head down. He's not reacting really in any way. He stayed down.
Does he make eye contact?
I haven't seen him do so. Yeah. I mean, I'm busy taking notes, but when you do look over, when you hear something kind of poignant, you kind of look over and have a glance at him, and he hasn't moved at all.
Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to hearing the evidence from tomorrow, Eamon. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.